Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome. I will be the moderator for this panel. My name is Lorenza Lazzati, and I'm the program coordinator at Diaspora Action Australia. Diaspora Action Australia, DA, is the only organization in Australia that only focuses on supporting diaspora-led organizations and initiatives that promote human rights, peace building, and aid and development. So just a couple of reminders before we get started with our session. This session is being recorded and the presentations will be uploaded to the platform after the event and will be available for 12 months on demand viewing. Also, you have a few different ways to interact with us today. So there is the chat box, I suppose you're very familiar with this at this stage, where you can put in your comments through the whole session, or you can, there's the ask a question button, the purple button, which is below the feed, the video, and you can use that to ask any question to our speakers today. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to put your question to us through that. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm speaking, the BUKJEH people of the Kulin Nation, who have cared for this land since time immemorial. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I also would like to invite all our guests today, particularly those who are joining us in different locations across Australia, to share the acknowledgement of country through the chat box. And if there are any First Nation people joining us today, please let us know, because we'll be very delighted to hear from you as well. Now, moving on to our panel today, I'm very pleased to share this session with 5 amazing speakers. And what we're going to do is we're going to hear from them first. They'll present and let us know about their work first. And then, as I said, we will have a Q&A session. We'll try our best to go through as many questions as possible. So please pop in your question to the Ask a Question button. Now, please join me to welcome our speakers: Louise Olive from Refugee Council of Australia, Aseel Tayah from BUKJEH, Apajok Biar from South Sudan Voices of Salvation, Nora Michael from the Syrian Aid Society Australia, and Hadi Zaher from Akademos Society. So our first speaker today is going to be Dr. Louise Olive. Louise is the only known diaspora speaker we have on the panel today. Nonetheless, Louise has plenty of experience working with diaspora communities. She's done so for many, many years. And she will be somewhat our compass today. So Louise will help us get a better understanding of the main characteristics of diaspora humanitarianism. What we found in our experience is that a lot of times, people still have not even clear who diaspora are. When we talk about transnational networks, for example, what are they? So Louise, we unravel some of these main points, which sort of will help us through a baseline of knowledge and understanding, which will kind of allows us somewhat to get a better sense, a better grasp of the work that our diaspora speakers are going to present to us today. And it will also help inform our conversation towards the end of the session. So let me introduce Dr. Louise. Louise Olive works as a senior policy advisor for the Refugee Council of Australia, a consultant for the Asia Pacific Network of Refugees, and as a sessional academic. Louise has worked for NGOs in various research, policy, and advocacy roles in Australia, Cambodia, and Ghana since 2001. Her PhD in Anthropology and Development Studies at University of Melbourne focus on the motivations, modalities, and implication of refugee diaspora humanitarianism to the international refugee regime. She serves on the board of Eritrean Australian Humanitarian Aid and Zaher Learning. Louise is an adjunct fellow in the Humanitarian and Development Research Initiative at Western Sydney University and was a founding member of the Diaspora Learning Network. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Lorenza, and it's really exciting to be here with an incredible panel. So I have a very short presentation. It's really just to try and help frame our conversation and hopefully, as Lorenza said, so we start on the same page. So I'm just going to speak about what we mean by diaspora humanitarianism, what are some of the characteristics of diaspora-led humanitarian action, and what some of the implications, some ideas about implications of diaspora humanitarianism for how we understand humanitarianisms, but also practice more broadly. And I guess the reason that I'm on this panel is partly because of my work at the Refugee Council over many years, over 10 years, supporting refugee diaspora advocates in Australia who are raising their voice about concerns and activities of their families, friends, communities back home and in places of displacement. And also because I've got to know a lot of people over many years from very different diaspora communities. And you start to see when you work with people across different communities, some of the commonalities in the way that people mobilize and respond. And I think doing my PhD was really part of thinking about how could I be a good ally in this space, because I could see from the much broader refugee regime perspective how forced displacement responses are so grossly inadequate, and actually how effective some of the diaspora organizations that I've come to know can be in this space. So, and also questioning what could be more effective in that space. In terms of a definition, diasporas are defined as dispersed collectivities residing outside their country of origin who maintain regular or occasional contacts with what they regard as their homeland and with individuals and groups of the same background residing in other host countries. And I think what's important here is to think about people as people networks. So these networks are not located in a place necessarily, they are located by the way that people connect across borders, and that can be between multiple sites simultaneously. The second point here, and I should say this comes from colleagues in Europe who are working on diaspora humanitarianism at DEMEC, that diasporas are a hybrid mix of both identity expression and political practice. Hence, there is a need to pluralize diaspora. So we're not talking about a group of people, we're talking about kind of not a fixed entity or group, but different ways in which people come together, identify, self-identify, and that changes, and it can change over time. Diaspora humanitarianism, then it follows, refers to how diasporas are involved in humanitarian action. And I've got the quote there that's a fairly well-worn one about what we can understand as humanitarian action, action that's designed to save lives, alleviate suffering, and maintain and protect human dignity during and in the aftermath of crisis, etc. So how do we think about characteristics of, and I've put in brackets, refugee, diaspora, humanitarianism, but understanding that this, I'm particularly interested, and I know our panelists are in displacement situations, but there are other forms of diasporas that maybe don't have an experience of displacement that are still involved in similar types of activities. And I'm drawing here on the work of Nicholas Van Heer and Robin Cohen, which I kind of think is a useful way of thinking about different spheres of engagement. And they speak about this on 3 levels around household, extended family engagement, which I've put here in this diagram as kind of something that we are well aware of and is actually quite a incredible support for people in a humanitarian context is things like remittances, migration support that comes through household and extended family. The second sphere here is around known communities. So this is friends and community that are known to each other, maybe not individually, but come from the same place, the same language group, the same school, and connect in a way because of that mutual sense of a community. And in terms of humanitarian action, we can think about known communities' involvement in philanthropy, advocacy, collective remittances. And I think the examples of colleagues on this panel will probably give you a better sense of some of that particularly collective remittances, or the way that communities come together. And then the third point is around imagined community. So how diasporas create a sense of who a people are, and a way of thinking about a people. I won't talk too much about that. The second point here around characteristics is that often people in diaspora communities have a portfolio of obligations. They can be working in humanitarian action on all of those different spheres, as well as having a whole lot of obligations like we all do in our lives in the country where people reside. The third point here is that I think it's useful to think about the different structure of relationships between diasporas located in different parts of the world. This comes also from Van Heer and Cohen's work, but between the homeland, between the near diaspora, which is often thought about as people in neighboring countries, or and we're talking here about refugee diasporas, people in countries of asylum close to the homeland but living as refugees. And then far diasporas in countries like Australia, like the US and Canada and Europe, who but have different capacities to act and different relationships between the different kind of community members in different parts of the world. And then finally, the characteristics that of diaspora humanitarianism is that it's dynamic and it changes, it waxes and wanes, and obligations, that portfolio of obligations, can look different at different points in time. So, you know, the most obvious one is at a time of crisis, at a time of conflict, there can be a surge of mobilization within diaspora communities to respond because of crisis. So we need to think about diasporas of working at different levels, geopolitically working across different territory and space, and also across different time scales, and how distant and how urgent crisis feels to members in the diaspora. In terms of the types of activities, I'm not really going to talk about the first point around diaspora organizations' involvement in a whole range of different types of activities. But I did want to point to this idea that diaspora humanitarianism involves something that is also non-quantifiable, which I think is a really important contribution actually to humanitarian responses. The idea of bearing witness, acting in solidarity, providing a voice where voices are silenced, and helping to sort of knit fabrics of care, social fabrics of care. I think that we can see that diaspora humanitarians have distinct motivations to help, have some distinct capacities, and face some distinct challenges. Maybe not they're the only ones that face these challenges and have these capacities, but there's something about diaspora humanitarianism and that lends itself to different ways of working. And I'm very happy to that, you know, we can return to some of these at the end. My final slide and point is that, and I think we've heard this a lot in this conference already, and I really loved the presentations this morning in the open plenary, this afternoon in the open plenary, that we live in a world of humanitarianisms, not humanitarianism. And I think it's when we're thinking about diaspora humanitarianism that we keep in mind that anyone who's helping to alleviate suffering of a stranger in need, and I use that in quotation marks because the idea of proximity and distance can be very different for different actors. But it is a complicated act, and who we are as helpers, how we understand suffering, and what capacity we have to do something about it all matter. And I think it's great to have this panel here at this conference, because I think the potential for greater exchange, collaboration, and recognition within humanitarian landscapes of this diversity of actors is that we can create richer tapestries of care and support for those who suffer. And I think that's what I hope we can hear more about from my fellow panelists. So thank you.
Thank you, Louise. That was fantastic and very succinct and informative. Very helpful. Thank you very much for that. And I certainly agree with you about the humanitarianism. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but definitely our colleagues on the panel today will be able to show us a very different and alternative way to deliver aid and development. So let me then move on to our next speaker, Aseel Tayah. Aseel is a prolific art maker, drawing diverse participants into her orbit through the courage of her convictions and the power of her stories. Aseel is a highly capable project manager, overseeing culturally complex and sensitive processes with care, intellect, and rigor. Since arriving in Melbourne, Aseel has been an unstoppable force in the cultural landscape. She has created numerous new works, such as BUKJEH and Lullabies Under the Sky. Lullabies Under the Stars, inviting communities into the experience of asylum seekers and refugees through deeply personal and informational multi-art engagements. She has built partnerships with key cultural organizations such as Arts Centre Melbourne, Polyglot, Art House, Arts Front, and Multicultural Arts Victoria. She's a highly sought after speaker on the subject of cultural rights and the role of the arts in building social cohesion and harmony. Her work demonstrates a criticality that is much needed in a predominantly white arts sector towards cultural equity. Aseel shows an unparalleled commitment to her craft. She eats, sleeps, and breathes community art and cultural development practice as life force, not only for her, but for the vulnerable communities she engages and supports. Aseel has incredible stamina for transformation, is undaunted by barriers, and prolific in making the case for a more diverse arts sector. Over to you, Aseel.
Thank you, Lorenza. It's so great to hear what you said, Louise, and also reflect myself about being in diaspora and dreaming about it all the time. I will share with you some of what we do here, and most of what Lorenza mentioned is actually my work in Australia. Not many know about the secret things that we do overseas because it's just not in anywhere that it's visible. But before that, I would like to share a part of the play we use, we acknowledge and we start in our play of BUKJEH. I am a refugee in a colonized land. I come from a land, occupied land, a place I once called home till it became home no more, no longer a place for dreams or a haven for new memories. When water became safer than land, camps became safer than our own bodies, and prisons became safer than our cities as they lit on fire. We only ever leave home when home won't let us stay, displaced from our origin, guests on a displaced people, a privilege we could ill afford. We found beauty in the Kulin nation. We found love in the Burundri people. We found refuge in the embrace of this land. And to its owners, to its custodians, to the people who carry its history, read its culture, and read its future, we are grateful and we are forever pay our respect. Our work on BUKJEH is a place. What is BUKJEH? It's a sack of belongings. It's what I, as a child, watched my people carry for years and years, and always dreamed about what it can be in there, what they have carried when they had to leave home. It must be so magical that make people suffer and survive 70 years and more in camps and refugee camps. And from there, the whole idea of BUKJEH started. The whole idea of the theatre work in BUKJEH in Australia started. And from there we made more. We did collaborate with many audiences and many organizations in Australia that work with art, work with young people, work with moms, work with elderly community. And the last one was during a lockdown when around Eid, when all the community housing buildings were locked in and they couldn't go to the mosque and we couldn't go anywhere. We organized 1,500 gifts to take home, to their houses, collaborating with the community that worked with them. We did many things in Australia, including going to schools and work with children to tell and ask children what they know about the refugees' journeys, what asylum seeker means, and really listen to the children's story, the innocence one, like how does the bread look back home? Did you make another shape of beard? And avoid really all these kind of very racist questions, but really deeply go into the innocence of those children and link them to the communities. All of this happened here in Australia, but what about home? What did we do home? I'm gonna leave you for a moment with a video, and then I will don't get enough of this. A few years ago, I was gifted a 4-year-old now, a girl. Her name is Rima. And I, since then, started going to toy libraries in Australia. I loved the fact that we can have that. I was depressed. I had a postnatal depression, and I don't know if it's disappeared already, because other depressions of being away from home comes all the time. I don't know how people deal with it, but as a mom that really cared about home, and I was thinking about, if I am in the privileged Australia, living in a very warm house, no war or bombing every day in front of my head, and I cannot, like, I have this and I'm suffering being away from my mom, and I'm hardly kind of raising a child. How does moms that live in Palestine, that are away from everything, in Gaza specifically, can actually raise children and raise them so beautifully like they do? So I came up with the idea that I would like to make toy libraries in Palestine. There's none. I was searching, maybe there is, maybe I can donate something, but there wasn't. So I collaborated with organizations I worked with, like Women's Against Violence, like Together We Stand, many organizations that work with refugees and asylum seekers, with people in the camps in Palestine. And we started gathering toys, many of them. And you can see, like, I went back home, and over 10 days, I had people, hundreds that I didn't ever meet before, just coming and dropping toys, dropping books, dropping so many things. That was where I slept, but at night we just like move all the toys and sleep, me and my daughter, and then put it back and like keep doing the rest in the morning. Students I taught as a teacher before came to help. Many people, it was amazing. In the end, we had over 280 boxes full of toys and 8 toy libraries, and the 9th is happening now on Gaza. I will show you some photos as well. So that's kind of, there is many more photos to come, but there is a toy library that is actually now happening, similar to the Dockland kind of style library, but on Gaza's beach. So it's like different abilities and different kind of outcomes, but it's amazing what these guys have been doing. The other thing I wanted to share as well is a project I did once I was making all these toys back in Melbourne here. I was looking at everything that we have done, everything that we did in Melbourne, with all the hardship that we have been through. We are very privileged to be in here, and it's very safe. And while I was making those packs with my 3-year-old back then, I was like, what about Gaza? Like, I cannot not do anything. Like, children here can always go and buy gifts. What about the children in the streets in Gaza? So it's a magical story, but I said to my husband, can we just send money? It was 3 days before Eid. And he said, but that's a lot, like what to buy? I wanted like all the refugee camps, neighborhoods to be full of toys. And that's a big dream. And I said, look, I will send half of it and ask them to start packing the toys. And then we would just put a fundraising and whatever happens will happen. And he just put my daughter inside for a shower. And by the time he came out, he saw me crying. He thought something happened, but the whole amount of money was done over a shower, like was raised in less than 20 minutes of fighting a child at the shower was all raised. And these teams went all around Gaza, just like, I know it might be small and might be so simple, and for us it's nothing, it's just a bag of lollies, but I know that some families don't even have that 1 shekel, which is like 0.33 of a dollar, to kind of go and buy some toys and some gifts for Eid for their children. So that was amazing. Few years earlier, when I first came here, I also had a miscarriage and I lost my baby. And I was thinking, if I didn't even see this child and I was so mourning, what happens to all these children that actually lost their parents or their people that they lived with and they know so much. So I also did the same. I was fresh in Australia, so I still had lots of conversations, lots of people I knew and I was in contact with back home. And I just posted a big post saying, that's what I'm doing, who is in? And there was like hundreds, like maybe 200 people out of my students, people I donated or like volunteered with, whoever. And people came with us and just packed many toys. I will go into a toys shop and people will fill my bags, my car with things. Like the students will go and they will fill the whole bag for them. So that's why and how we kind of started the whole thing. And every time I post one post of saying I'm doing something, I will see everybody standing. What can we do? Where can we find you? Where we can see you? What we did back home might be very small here, but what that means for them is a lot. The rest of the money, because we bought the food, the toys, but the donations were huge. So we gave scholarships for students that were excellent in what they're doing. We bought Braille printers for children that are in some organization that cannot afford these kind of printers, like many things. That's how every time I go back home and mom say, can you please just come and visit us without big kind of projects, but I just don't know. I think I miss home so much, not stop it. There's many things. I maybe chose to kind of show you some of them project on my website, so you can always go there and ask questions if you want, or like see how you can also contribute. But I know that the time is very short, so I will leave it with other people. But it's again, you can always go into my website and send me any message and any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Aseel. That was fantastic. Thank you for sharing your experience and the work you're doing. I always find quite fascinating when I hear stories like yours, where just from something so small or something so personal that it turns into something very important and very significant for many people that we don't see every day. We know about them, but we don't see them every day. I think what you did was it's quite unique. It's very I don't know. I always get a bit emotional when I see all the toys and everything, because I've been looking through all those photographs for quite some time. So it just gets to me quite a bit. But thank you very much for sharing that. It was great. Now moving to our next speaker, Apajok Biar. Apajok was born in a refugee camp in Kenya and arrived in Australia with her family as a 2-year-old toddler. She is a passionate advocate for gender equality, women and girls empowerment, as well as advancing refugee youth participation in decision-making that affects them. Apajok is the chairperson and co-founder of South Sudan Voices of Salvation, a not-for-profit youth-run and led organization that speaks up against all forms of injustice and violations of human rights. Apajok is also the co-founder and member of ANGAC Women Association Australia, a women-led and run organization that understands humanitarian aid and supports women in South Sudan, as well as Australia-based South Sudanese and ANGAC community women. Apajok is on the board of the Women's Museum of Australia. She's also part of the gender audit team to UNHCR and a member of the Refugee Advisory Committee to UNHCR on refugee resettlement. In 2019-2020, Apajok was the regional focal point for the Asia region to the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth on Migration. Apajok was also a finalist for the Australia's Women of the Future 2017 award, and in the same year, she was awarded the 2017 Western Sydney Refugee Youth Award in recognition of outstanding achievement in the field of community leadership, and received the Mayan Refugee Youth Scholarship of the Refugee Youth Advocate Representative for Australia and New Zealand at UNHCR Geneva, on the panel discussing what youth involvement is and the importance of having refugee young people at the table in any discussion that affects them. Apajok has a Bachelor of Social Work and is currently undertaking her Masters of Humanitarian Assistant at Deakin University. She is the community facilitator for Create Foundation, a youth organization that works with children in the foster care system, and she is the mother of a beautiful 9-month-old girl. Over to you, Apajok.
Thank you, Lorenza. I would like to first and foremost start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm speaking to you guys from today. I am on the land of the Aranda Nation here in Alice Springs. So today I'll be presenting about a refugee, being a refugee, but being a refugee and also being a humanitarian actor, and how these can be intertwined. These are two facets of my identity that kind of interlinked in my passion and in the work that I do. So I'm excited to share this with you guys. So this quote by Martin Luther King Jr. Kind of puts a fire in my belly. Anytime I think, oh, maybe I shouldn't do anything about that. Maybe I should wait for someone else to respond to that. When he speaks about our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about the things that matter, because if we are always just waiting for someone else to be the responder to that situation, if we're waiting for someone else to be in a better position to respond to that, then we're not doing it right. Everyone has a role to play, and everyone is in the best position to do something about it. You can partner the people around you. You are an agent of change, and it's just about realizing that and stepping into it and just really embracing it. So a little bit about my journey. So I was born in Kakuma refugee camp, but before that, my parents are from Sudan, which was known as Sudan then, but now known as South Sudan. They had to flee by foot with my older brother, walking for 4 weeks to Ethiopia, where they sought refuge. And when they were there, my other 2 brothers were born, and then they had to flee again and walk by foot to the neighboring country of Kenya, where they were resettled in the refugee camp there called Kakuma, where my older sister and I were born. And then when I was about 2.5 years old, I was fortunate enough to come to Australia, and Australia is, has been our home ever since. So about 23, 24 years now. So my personal experience and how it influences the work that I do. So being born in a refugee camp and knowing that I was one of the lucky ones to get out, kind of leaves not only myself, but a lot of people in my community with an aspect of gratitude, but also an aspect of guilt. Because we were the lucky ones that got out, but there were so many people that are still there who have been there for decades. And refugee camps have only been placed there for temporary solutions to long-term problems. And being able to find avenues to provide support to those who weren't able to get out has really been a means of solitude for us. And really, I think it's just become an extension of who we are as a community. So came to Australia in 1997 with my family. And then being born in a camp, I have had a gratitude to humanitarian aid workers and the sacrifice that they give for their lives, to go put their lives on hold for months or years at a time to go look after people and provide support where these people have had nothing. And big agencies like UNHCR and so forth. So in 2016, I was a part of a global consultation called the Global Refugee Youth Consultations, which was hosted by UNHCR. And that was my stepping stone into global advocacy. And not knowing that a young refugee girl could have a voice on a global platform to affect change for people who are currently going through what we went through. And not only that, it became the stepping stone to realizing that we can be the change that we want to see in our world and in our community and not have to wait for someone else. So in 2013, a civil war broke out in South Sudan. And when this civil war broke out, it led to famine and so forth. So a group of young people, young South Sudanese youth around Australia, were speaking, yeah, let's pray for South Sudan, let's pray for South Sudan. Weeks, days went by and nothing was changing. And we're like, okay, what can we do about it? Let's donate. Okay, but there's so many people who aren't, who are falling through the cracks, who aren't being, who aren't receiving the aid that is needed. So we were like, okay, let's not wait for anyone else. Let's do it ourselves. So we started our organization called South Sudan Voice of Salvation. There was 32 of us across Australia. And we started partnering with other organizations like Anglican Aid, and we did an agricultural farming project. But in this humanitarian space, knowing that things are always so fluid, things are always changing, not long into the project, civil war came through Awarialo. We were doing our project and it had to cease. But in that short time that the project was happening, we saw great impact and great change to the lives of the people who were there. So a bit about the project we've been doing this year. So I am a proud co-founder of a women's organisation here in Australia called Enlarge Women Association of Australia. And what we've done, so Jonglei had received a big flood, especially the people of Biar this year in March, and a lot of people became internally displaced. And so through our networks within our communities, we got different numbers, spoke through WhatsApp, spoke through Facebook, and arranged avenues and methods for these people to be temporarily resettled in neighboring countries and neighboring communities. And in doing so, we also found means to raise money with 35 women around Australia to raise $8,000 to send it back and provide them with that immediate support, provide them with that immediate aid. And how we did that was communicating with the people that were in the community and on the ground and asking them, okay, we have this money, how would you best want to utilize it? And being a community of farmers and cattle keepers, number one thing was a cow, please. So we said, okay, we can do that. And then providing the basic necessities like water, and food. And this was only the beginning. We're also in the process of doing more fundraising to support other affected communities. So other people who become internally displaced in Biar and Mangala and other areas, because what we found was when the flood came through, it wasn't really widely spoken about, and not many people heard about it, and not many humanitarian responders were on the ground responding and providing that kind of support. So a lot of people on the ground felt as though they were forgotten about and that they were not being heard, and that they had no hope. And so reminding them that we are in the diaspora, yes, but we are also with you, and we will provide the support that we can. It is COVID, so we physically can't come and provide that support to you right now, but we will do whatever we can to ensure that we can provide that support. And as a response, in this photo, you can see they did a community gathering because we're quite a collective community, and they sat together, speaking together, and also singing and dancing. So whenever hope is restored, and our community is such a, an embracive community where we love to sing and dance, and even in times of despair, if there's a little bit of hope, we love to share it with one another and sing and be grateful for that moment. And yeah, that's what we did. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Apajok. That was fantastic. And I have to say, always a pleasure to listen to you talking about the sort of projects you're involved with. Because to be honest, every single time there's something new. There's a different project. There's a massive, broad, like a really, really wide range of projects that either you've been involved with yourself or you know other parts of the South Sudanese communities have been developing. So it's always kind of absolutely fascinating to listen to you. There are 2 points that you mentioned in your presentation just now that I kind of want to highlight a little bit because they come back quite a lot with a lot of diaspora communities we work with. One is the point about the guilt. We are the lucky ones, but we still have people who are in camps, who are in a dire situation, who are in need of help. What you said towards the end as well, we are into diaspora. We are with you, but we will do whatever we can to support. That is another point that again it comes across. It comes up quite a lot with many different communities, and I think it's an absolute strength of the diaspora communities, and the fact that you know of things when they happen in real time, and you're able to respond much more quickly than traditional NGOs as well. So that's another point that it often comes up. So thank you very much for bringing those points up just now. So let me move on now to our next presenter. I'm so happy that she's with us today. I haven't seen her in a long time, so it's great to have her with us, Nora Michael. Nora is a proud member of the Syrian Aid Society Australia. She has been a member of AAS Australia for over 10 years. Nora worked towards achieving consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council for AAS in Iraq and previously represented AAS at the UN. She's passionate about preserving the rights, livelihood, and culture of Assyrians all over the world, whether being of Assyrian, Chaldean, or Syriac origin. Separate to AAS, Nora is a family law director at the national firm. And Nora, over to you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm not as tech savvy as my fellow speakers, so bear with me with my boring chit chat. I hope I keep you entertained somewhat. So in preparing this presentation, I collaborated with Dr. Daniel J. Tower, an Assyrian academic and researcher who's taken a keen interest in the plight of Assyrians both in our homeland in North Iraq, as well as in diaspora. So I'd like to credit Dr. Tower for his research and for his assistance in highlighting the issues relevant to Assyrians in diaspora as they relate to the seminar. So what I've done is draw on some of the commentary that Daniel and I discussed and that are relevant to our people, and drawn on the circumstances in Iraq and in the Middle East generally as they relate to Assyrians, and how Assyrian Aid Society Australia, being one of various Assyrian Aid Society organizations around the world, respond to these needs, the needs of our people in our originating homeland. So I think it's crucial for the research into what affects Assyrians in diaspora and other minorities in diaspora to continue, to educate ourselves about the issues facing our community and other minorities in diaspora and to address their respective needs. And I suggest this would enable a positive connection between our community, our ethnicity, and allows individuals and communities in diaspora to thrive in our resettled countries. Initiatives such as a seminar facilitate this opportunity, and I'd like to thank the Center for Humanitarian Leadership, Diaspora Action Australia, Diaspora Learning Network for providing my community as an Assyrian and others with the opportunity to be heard. And in particular, Lorenza, I'd like to thank you very much for your efforts in keeping Assyrian Aid Society in particular involved in these discussions and involved in the Senate inquiries. I think this level of exposure is crucial to responding to the needs of Assyrians in diaspora and indeed other minorities. So I hope that assists other minorities as well as our own. So in a description of diaspora as it relates to Assyrians refers to persons of Assyrian, Syriac, and Chaldean origin, and mobilization of Assyrians in diaspora is achieved by worldwide Assyrian organizations, humanitarian organizations such as the Assyrian Aid Society. And our committee in particular, we fund and promote relief projects, the establishment of an Assyrian educational system in our homeland, which we describe as Bitnaharen, if you're using our native tongue, in cultural activities both within and outside of North Iraq, where we have our main Assyrian Aid Society office. So my discussions have regard to the issues of, or the prongs of estrangement, connection, and mobilizing the diaspora as they relate to Assyrians and the work we do at AAS. So firstly, our estrangement from our origin geographically has been fraught with the history of war and civil unrest and provides a dire need to connect with our homeland. At AAS, we communicate with the Assyrians in the Nineveh Plain in Iraq, and the description of our homeland as Bitnaharen is described in the AAS Constitution as modern day Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, which is where the Assyrian Empire was based many thousands of years ago. However, the vast areas of governments, these vast areas have governments with competing interests, various and often feuding religious factions, and the Assyrian communities within each of these countries are often caught in the crossfire. So we found ourselves often, as mentioned earlier, having to respond to crises rather than trying to mobilize our efforts and improve on the living, basically the standards of living and of our people back home. With AAS in particular, we have the benefit of direct communication with AAS in North Iraq. We've maintained a close connection, a strong connection to the land, and marks the areas where our Assyrian capital was originally located. So what we do is we focus our efforts on our area of origin, and the aid that we distribute to AAS in Iraq gets distributed by them to the areas of concern that they identify. So maintaining that direct link to our people in our homeland is so crucial. So we have a very open dialogue and a very open set of communication to respond to their needs, whatever they may be, whether it's agricultural, education, medical, especially medical, now that the COVID pandemic has hit Iraq quite badly. So we provide that assistance to our ethnic community directly, and they distribute it for us. So at AAS, we strive to maintain a connection and our identity by providing funding to the Assyrians in our homeland for their basic survival. Our mission statement is to aid Assyrians in our homeland so they are encouraged to remain living in Iraq. Our aims and focus as Assyrians in diaspora have been and continue to be for the Assyrians to thrive in Bitnaharen. But in saying that, it's been increasingly difficult for Assyrians, and this began many years ago, since the genocide of 1914, which saw 750,000 Assyrians systematically killed. And various attempts since then, unfortunately, have attempted to eradicate our people, our culture, and identity. And this is ongoing even today with the recent destruction of the 3,000-year-old wall that was the Nineveh Wall, which was not a protected antiquity but should have been. Recent events such as the invasion of Mosul, where various antiquities were targeted, churches, and more importantly, people killed or forced out and displaced by the hundreds of thousands. The displacement was widespread. So the oppression of Assyrians with the rise of the regional government currently in power also hasn't helped. Our response as Assyrians in diaspora has been crucial for the daily survival of our people in our homeland. Having received no support from the local and regional government, it falls on the Diaspora Humanitarianism to respond and to provide the funding that really, and the support that really the local and regional governments should be providing to our people. What we feel is that our diasporic community can't, well, this is my perspective, that we can't thrive in our country, in our resettled country, when the needs of our people in our country of origin are not being met. Personally, I wouldn't feel that I'd be successful in my own right, knowing that my people are suffering in Iraq or in Syria or Iran or wherever they may be residing. At the moment, their basic needs are not being met. COVID has taken a significant hit, and our president of Assyrian Aid Society very recently and unfortunately passed away from COVID. So the impact on our community is severe. It's tragic, and it's debilitating. You can't really it's like a constant state of mourning, and it's the perfect word to use because we are in mourning for one of the leaders of our organizations. And the knowledge that someone like that takes with them when they go is somewhat irreplaceable. And in the time of crisis, even if it was something that you can replace, it becomes even more difficult to do so. So again, we're here at a distance trying to provide funding and support, but when something like this happens, really, there's really not much we can do apart from pray for better days in future for them. Our focus as Assyrians in diaspora has turned to become meeting the daily needs of our people, and we're distracted from the focus of strengthening their connection between Assyrians in diaspora and Assyrians in our homeland. And this cycle of taking 2 steps forward and providing funding and seeing good things happen to our villages in Iraq, but then taking 1 step back, whether it's an economic, political, social, or medical crisis, it's deflating. It serves as a significant challenge to our efforts to promote and maintain our ethnicity in our homeland. So in saying that, the aims of AAS are not only to provide financial assistance to Assyrians in Beth Nahren, but also to establish a community network of support for Assyrians in our homeland via the support and engagement of Assyrians in diaspora. And it's these communities in diaspora that are the source of our fundraising efforts. So mobilizing the community in diaspora to maximize these efforts is crucial to our purpose. And our attempts should be, from my perspective, to unify diasporic efforts. And this is another issue I was in discussions with Dr. Tayah about, and to increase the attempts to ease local tensions, to save our homeland and save the diasporic community. So basically, get our kids back to the homeland, get them interested in going back, have our people living there, maintaining successful lives, rather than being displaced, scrambling to get out of the country, and not seeing a future for their children, because we'll lose that connection. So if we don't have those ties to the land as an ethnicity without a country of origin, as in there's no Assyria in existence at the moment anymore, unfortunately, without the ties to the land, without the language and the ethnicity and culture being in place, we'll find ourselves very quickly down there to extinction. And that's, obviously not something we want to be facing. And if I can just quote something that was said by a member of an indigenous community in Bangladesh very recently, facing eviction from his land. He said, "If I lose my land, I am no one, I have nothing." Our ethnicity as Assyrians, as I said, is tied to the land of the Nimba Plains. That's where our antiquities lie. It's where the soil is rich with our history. If we lose our ties to our land, if the systematic displacement of our people continues at the level we've seen in recent years, we will have no land to call our homeland. We'll have nothing to go back to, celebrate together, and our identity will be lost. Again, this is aggravated by the disrespect of our antiquities or our culture, such as the knocking down of the wall very recently. So at AAS, we've somewhat transformed into an NGO that promotes the needs of Assyrians in diaspora by involvement in local and international forums. And that was mentioned in our involvement in UN forums such as this. And this unity, I think, has brought us together as a community in diaspora, and allows our AAS fundraising efforts to remain focused on Assyrians in Iraq at the same time. So we've transformed or developed, if you like, because of the desperate needs of survival of our homeland, of the people in our homeland. But we don't have the people, power, or resources to continue our work in our homeland while bringing to light the issues relevant to our people in diaspora. So we cannot really, we're stretched. Our resources can't focus on both. If we're this stretched, the focus takes away from the benefits afforded to our community in diaspora. I find that our hands are tied in terms of our outreach, and we're desperate to preserve our identity and cultural ties within our geographical origin, and we somewhat forget about the Assyrians in diaspora, and they either become lost in their own issues, assimilated, integrated, which is integration to community is great, but not if it means the loss of our ethnicity and our culture. So we have to accept the reality of our community remaining in diaspora and the limited work we can do in this arena for our people while we are reaching out to our people in our homeland.
Thank you very much, Nora. Thank you very much for your contribution. That was great. And we've done some work in recent times with the Assyrian Chaldean and Syria community, and I always find very fascinating see these communities working together, because when you speak to people, as you say, people could be from Turkey, could be from Syria, it could be from Iraq. So it's a really vast geographic area, yet regardless of today kind of coming from one specific country, there is a real unity in terms of identity and belonging to the same community, regardless of the existing current political border. So I always find that quite fascinating and interesting about the Syrian Chaldean Syria community. And I'm really sorry to hear about the president of AAS.
Thank you.
I will have time to talk to you about that later. And also one thing that I was again point that it was very interesting that you mentioned about as well. It was how in a way the aid that AES is currently providing somewhat replaces the aid that should be provided by local governments, should be provided by, it shouldn't be on the shoulder of diaspora communities to help the well-being or do something for the well-being of the people living in countries. Yet diaspora have to step up because these mechanisms, it's still not working. They're actually not there. And another point that is very important and common among many communities is the fact that your main source of support is your community of reference here, is the diaspora community where most of fundraising usually are directed towards. So that was a very important point that you touched on as well. So thank you very much for your contribution. Now we'll move on to our last speaker for today, Hadi Zaher. So Hadi is a paralegal by profession, a blogger by instinct, and a photographer by out of boredom. Hadi holds a bachelor degree in economics and politics at Akademos Society. Hadi is the campaign and communications officer. Over to you, Hadi. Hadi, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry, I'd lost the screen. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you to Center for Humanitarian Leadership. Thank you to Diaspora Action. And thank you to the panel today for this fantastic organization. It's lovely to hear from all of you. I think my presentation, having said that, I'm very conscious of the time. I can see the countdown happening, 28 minutes and something left. So I'll try to be as brief and as fast as possible without hopefully missing anything. My presentation will follow on from what the respected panelists just mentioned. Aseel, for example, mentioned the privilege that we have, how lucky we are to have this opportunity to be able to do so much being in Australia. Apajok, for example, touched on that the issue of guilt and gratitude. It is something that we can definitely relate to here in my community as well as Akademos society. And Nora touched on that idea of maintaining a connection as well as that ongoing concern for those who are left behind, regardless of where the rest of us happen to be anywhere in the world. And finally, I noticed Lorenza mentioning that very key issue of us as diaspora organizations doing what mainstream humanitarian organizations, governments, international agencies should be doing. And it's in that vacuum, in that absence of all that work, that a lot of this community spirit, community goodwill, and all the good work has been taking place and is still taking place. Now, I'm a board member of Akademos Society. We're a small community-based organization based primarily here in Melbourne, but members all around Australia. Also, a new member based in Europe. So I would not go so far as to claim that we're an international organization as of yet, but hopefully we'll get there one day. The sort of work that we have been doing and that I'll shed light on in the coming slides is a community-based model. And it flows on where I mentioned earlier that a lot of the work that we've been doing, in fact, the entire motivation behind what we've been doing has flowed from the community goodwill that exists and the community spirit. There has always been that passion to do something about certain issues through the privilege and the fortune that we have in terms of the resources that we have access to here in Australia, the safety that we have access to. And us, the board members in Akademos, being the educated members of the community, have been able to, fortunate enough to use that opportunity towards the objectives of the organization that I'll shed light on. Now, in terms of who we are, the board is made up of volunteers, and the work that we've primarily been doing has been within the Zaher community in Pakistan and also in Afghanistan. Up until a few years ago, the primary fundraising that we did was from Zaher diaspora community here in Australia. But over the years, we've received tremendous support from allies and friends from various communities all across Australia. And in terms of the work, before I proceed, this video should be able to provide a brief overview of the sort of work that we've been doing. Sorry, can you hear the music?
Yes, we can. Oh.
Now, by way of introduction, Zaher community, the community that we originate from and work with, are a minority group in Afghanistan as well as in Pakistan, and especially for the last 2 decades, and flowing on from the downfall of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, the community has been under a relentless target of suicide attacks, bombings, and other terrorist attacks. And for a very long time, the bulk of those attacks were concentrated in a small city along the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan called Quetta, where there's a sizable population of the community. And it is around that particular set of events that the organization the idea for the society or the organization first came into being. And today we stand as a diaspora community organization that is run by members of the community, primarily for the members of the community, but we've always been open to work with other communities. And in fact, we have had projects that work beyond just the Zaher community itself. We operate as a virtual organization. We don't have a head office. A lot of our work is based on project management and group work that happens in meetings such as the one we're having today, where we talk through things, make our notes, and then go out there to put those words into actions. Our board members are primarily based around Australia, but we have a new board member who is based in Europe, and the primary fundraising that we have been doing has been taking place in Australia. But having said that, we've had tremendous support from other parts of the world as well, including Europe and Canada. And now, going on with the theme of today's session, our projects have been enabled by our transnational social networks. So the network that we have in Australia, as well as the network that we have from our past lives, so to speak, or experience in places like Afghanistan, like Pakistan, and having that contextual knowledge of the humanitarian situation in those communities, in those countries, that has really enabled us to address key issues. And I think our strength has been that mobility that has come through as a result of the resettlement of refugee communities in Australia. How it started? Well, it started in response to the attacks that were happening in Quetta. In those 2 decades, roughly 2,000 members of the Zaher community were killed. Another 100,000 were forced to flee They fled to Europe, fled to Australia, fled to all sorts of places, and many of them died in boat sinkings on their way to Australia and to Europe. So it was a really desperate situation, and although the attacks have subsided for now, but the desperation caused by these relentless attacks, mainly carried out by Taliban, their allies, as well as organizations like Al-Qaeda, that the impact has not been just in the form of the outcome of the attacks, but it has been very much long-lasting. And as a result, the community faced societal and economic isolation. And in one particular attack, a busload of students traveling to a local institution was targeted, resulting in the death of many students and the maiming of others. That really, because Hazaras appear, because of their Asiatic features, they are of distinct appearance, it sort of overnight prevented any students basically from leaving their homes and attending education institutions, which are primarily located outside the neighborhoods where Hazaras live. So in response, we thought, look, as students, there's not much we can do. We cannot answer the big questions. We cannot provide security to the community. We cannot bring peace. But what we can do is use our minimal resources to assist fellow students. And in order to do so, we decided that we have to establish a model that's practical. That's something that we as students can do, but also something that's sustainable. It shouldn't be just something that we start do for a week and then get on with our own lives and forget about what was happening or what we had built. And our role became that of a facilitator. We work as a bridge between the donors here within the community and the recipients, who are primarily students based in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And the way to sustain this was through empowerment, monitoring, and feedback. Our donors were primarily community members in Australia. We operate as a board, and we work through partner organizations or volunteer organizations such as our own in Quetta, Kabul, and Bamiyan. And what the corporates use the word synergy, what has really brought all of this together is the existence of social media, our ability to be able to network. Now, if you can see in that image on the right, we're interviewing a scholarship applicant, and it's all taking place on Zoom. We ask our questions, they answer, and based on that, we make our decision. We advertise the sort of work that we do. Advertise is probably not an appropriate term, but we show the work that we do through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And we did a trial run in 2012, 2013 to see if we could do. When we did reach the conclusion that we can do it, we registered as a community association. And I'll just, we have over the years set up a few different projects. There are 4 projects. Sorry, I'll just, Lorenza, 2 minutes. Our main work has been through Akademos Scholarship, which has 60 scholars. We have been funding supplementary learning classes, which has roughly 90 students. Kids of the Street, where we support child laborers, and Akademos grants. And through Akademos grants, we've recently set up a computer lab in the remote Daikundi province, where students, school students, university students come and learn the usage of computer. And in this particular clip, the students can be seen learning the simple concepts like copying, pasting, using computer software to be able to connect to the outside world. But nonetheless, you can always find us on social media. We're more than happy to collaborate and work with like-minded organizations. That's brief contact information. And I'll leave you with this poem by the great Persian poet Hadi. Human beings are members of a whole, since the creation of one essence. And when the conditions of time bring a member to pain, the other members will suffer from discomfort. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So please join me to thank our panelists today for their fantastic contribution. Louise Olive, Aseel, Tayah, Apajok, Biar, Nora Michael, and Adi Zaher. And also would like to thank the Center for Humanitarian Leadership. In particular, I want to thank Liz and Georgina for their support. They've been absolutely fantastic and very patient over the last 6-7 weeks. And also would like to thank Wayne and the technical support that has helped us today. There are a few questions left unanswered in the chat box. I'll take note of them and we'll try to get back to you over the next few days. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope we'll cross paths again in some other session. Please enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks again to all our panelists.